Hi, welcome to a brand new tutorial series. I'm hoping this is going to be the first of many as we delve into the realms of Unreal Engine. And I thought I would kickstart this tutorial with something I see a lot of Unity developers who switch to Unreal struggle with, and how they take the Unity approach to a particular, in this case, the game mode or game instances aspect. How they sort of take the Unity approach into Unreal rather than actually using the Unreal approach. Now, the overall goal of this video, this lesson, is hopefully by the end you'll understand a bit more on how to apply this method. In terms of the method I'm talking about, it's the game mode or the game instance. Often both work in tandem, and how you can apply this logic to your own projects. Now, quite a common theme if we switch to this one. One thing I notice a lot of, obviously if we look at Unity now, it's quite common in Unity that we have a UI manager, or more particularly a game manager. Don't want to change that. And this game manager housing a script, obviously, which then controls the rules and I'm not going to say regulations. The goals, the mission statements, everything the player needs to do to complete that level, or the logic which controls everything that runs in the level. And obviously, Unity is is built on component-based systems. So you make a game object, you call it game manager, and it knows, and it becomes, you add your script to it. And what I often see is I see Unity developers take this approach in Unreal, and this will work, but you're fighting against the system. And Unreal already has a system built. It already has a way for you to handle this information. It has its own game manager script, in this case the game mode. And many people take the Unity approach into utilising this feature, on doing this feature within the engine, rather than taking the actual proper approach and following the Unreal framework. So, if we get down into it, I'll first start by introducing myself. I'm Rob. Let's get rid of that. I've been a game developer for 15 years. I've worked for Sony within QA, and I worked at TT Games within QA and design, and I've also been a technical designer, and still am at FreeSphere, as well as a new project which I'm hoping to announce soon. In my day job, I moved from the industry directly to move into teaching, and I teach post-16 education and higher education, teaching games development. And I'm an authorised Unreal instructor, which is something I'm really proud to be, and something obviously this is what kickstarted these tutorials and why I want to start making more. So, as I mentioned, Unity is a component-based, wants you to work in components, I should say, and it wants you to make a game manager script. And in fact, every Unity project has a game manager script, has a UI script, and potentially a sound manager script. A script whose sole job is to handle particular functionality. And obviously the game manager is the rules of your game at the most basic foundation. However, if we take a look at the Unreal method, or the Unreal approach, the Unreal has a built-in framework, and it has one called game mode. And the game mode is inbuilt, it's a ready-made class we can utilise, and this is where we put the rules of our game. Now, what's really important about this is it's part of the framework we have within Unreal. And if you were changing, say, as the example on the screen, if you had a team deathmatch capture the flag, each one would be a different game mode. The same way as in Unity, there'd be different game manager scripts. But the way in which we set these up and the way in which we embed them are very, very different. And many Unity developers take a Unity approach to this within Unreal when they transition. And this isn't the, like I say, the optimal way, and in actually many cases you're fighting the framework and putting yourself at a disadvantage. In some cases, depending on what it is you're trying to do and what type of game you're making. So, let's take a look. Now, Epic themselves have done some really, really great resources, and anyone who's switching to Unreal, I would encourage you to spend some time reading the documentation, and more importantly, reading this this website, this page, I should say. Now, Unreal is far more technically demanding from the off. I would say more so than some other engines. And if you take time to look at and understand how the foundation works, you'll have an easier time. Now, if we focus on the engine structure, the first one, and I actually have the photo, the image up here, we can actually see here how the engine structures itself. So if we zoom in, we launch the game, we load our level, we then have our game mode. Okay, on our game mode, manages our actors, it instantiates some maps, right, defines and creates the place pawn, the control. This is the rules and regulations of our game, and then this also ties into our game state and player state, and when we have multiplayer games, becomes a really important factor, because obviously there's only certain things we want to replicate over the network and things that we don't want to replicate. Now, this is inbuilt within the engine. We can create one and we can assign it. And from there we have our player, and then obviously we have our pawn, our controller, which are then all our different other aspects, which overall leads to our gameplay. Now, Unreal has a built-in game mode class. We use it, we can then set it to be our game mode, and we're working within our framework. We're working within the Unreal framework. One thing I see often is, now this is just a temporary project. This is a simple project which I'll walk you through momentarily. One thing I see happen is many people will create a blueprint actor and they will call it Game Manager, and then they'll drag that into the world, and now this blueprint is what they use to control the logic of the game. This will work, right? And I've seen many a project do it this way, and it will work. However, like I say, you are fighting against the system as such. You're fighting Unreal with how it wants to work. And depending on the type of game you're making and how you program the rest of your systems, you may find you end up having more issues, performance issues, and you'll end up potentially having to start, making a rod for your own back because of the way you've initialized things. Where, in fact, like I've said, if I go to blueprints now and we create a new blueprint class, I have a game mode class. Yeah, defines the game's played, its rules, the scoring. Unreal is giving you a class specifically for this, and that class then fits into the framework. And then we can, again, the same way you may create integers and variables in this actor, this blueprint, you can do exactly the same with this one. What the difference one is actually is a game manager and is inbuilt within that framework that Unreal gives us, and the other is creating that logic within a class which is designed for objects to be placed in the world, but not necessarily handle the rules and the logic of that world. And so in this example, which I'll show you shortly, I'll show you now. Now, this example is, all it is the original, it's the third person template. So if I press play, okay, we have the third person template. I can wander around, and all I've done is I've created 5 simple pickup objects, and I do actually have a trigger here, which will teleport me to the next level. Okay, now in terms of my player character, I've actually added nothing to it. This is the bog standard Unreal third-person character, and I have a coin, and all our coin is doing is on collision with our third-person character. Obviously, it's always good practice to make sure our casts are valid, and my mouse doesn't want to work for some reason, and some debug string. We're going to set, obviously we promote our third-person reference to a variable. We're going to get the score, which I have assigned, so I've created an integer to track score on the player, and obviously I increment it every time I touch the coin and destroy it. So it's pretty straightforward logic. Now, obviously I currently have the score on the player, on the third-person character blueprint. You potentially would also put this on the actual controller itself, but for this demonstration, the blueprint character is fine. Obviously, I will discuss in the tutorial or the relationship between the character controller and the pawn, because that can be quite confusing for some people as well. Now, like I say, the coin, as soon as we collect it, we add score, we increment our player score, and we destroy that. Okay, so nothing too advanced here, it's quite straightforward logic. So I click a coin, boom. And as we can see in the top right corner, I have a little UI that just tracks the score. And this will go up until we get 5. Yeah? So, just to repeat, we have our coin, we have our collision, we have our static mesh. Okay, and I've added a rotating movement, just added a bit of flair. Again, this is something that you potentially, it's not potentially, it's there for you. You may want to rotate objects. It's just a case of add component and rotate, and there we are. And we can then set the values of its rotation in our rotating component. So we collide with our player. We check that it's obviously is our player that we've collided with, and then we increment the score by 1 every time we collide with it, and then we destroy it. Nice and simple. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can obviously, if I just press play now and I walk through in here, and we can see I've got a little debug message. You don't have enough points. I should have put this in the UI, but time. So all this is just a trigger volume, trigger box. It's not a blueprint. It's just a simple trigger box, and obviously the game mode is controlling on when we can actually go through here. So if I open my blueprints, we have here Rob's game mode first. Now this is the one I'm using, and to create this, all I've done is go on blueprint class, game mode, and I've named it appropriately. This is on retrospectively, probably not the best naming convention. Now I open this up and it looks like any other blueprint, with some caveats. So first of all, obviously viewport, it's always going to look blank. You could add a mesh if you wanted to, but it's pretty pointless because it's just not going to show up. And like with any other blueprint, we can add variables, and we have a script as well. And all I've done is event begin play. I set the score goal, so the target, again, naming convention there probably let me down when I was planning this out. I've set it to 5. Okay, and it's 5 there because during testing I was having issues, so you may want to set the value in the variable section, because for whatever reason when I was first trying this out I was having some issues. Now one of the key differences with the game mode is if we click the top here, the self, we have all these different options. We have tick enabled, obviously we have our default variables if we enable them. In case obviously this one's public, I can then obviously hide it. But this is the most important part really, is what we're after. This classes section. I've got the game mode session, the game state, our controller, our HUD, our default pawn. So if I compare this to our example, okay, and let's make this appear. We can see here, default pawn is default pawn, there's nothing there, spectator pawn. These are all the default values of various systems that we will want to embed and set up. So obviously in case of our default pawn class, the character which we want to load in. Now, there's a couple of ways we can set these. So if we open project settings, so if we go to edit project settings, okay, and then we have maps and modes, and very up top here, default game mode. Now if I set this to example, and example has no pawn, and just the default values, and I'm going to press play. Okay, it's going to load, and the moment I start working on these, this isn't working. Now the reason this isn't working is because I have some logic which is looking for the value of this, and in fact I reference this game mode. Now if we just change this back to Rob's first game mode. Now what's really important, obviously this is the default game mode for the project, so whatever we set here would stay the same in every level we load. Now I will show you how we can override that as we progress, but it's really important to know whatever you set here will last for the duration unless we change it. Now the way I've controlled this logic is I've utilized our level blueprint. Now if I open the level blueprint, I have here some logic that looks a little bit messy because it is a little bit messy. Now, yeah, this is not as complex as it looks. Now, the level blueprint is obviously the logic governed for the level. So again, if I just go up top and I open the level blueprint, and all I do here is the first half, I create my widget. Okay, and all my widget is, if I show you my UI score widget, okay, it's just a text block, and then I have a function which casts to a player character and gets the value of score, and then obviously puts it into that text block. Nice and straightforward. So I cast to my player character and I make a reference to it. I then cast to my game mode. Now this is one of the really key reasons why we want to work with the Unreal's framework and not work against it. If we want to access the game mode and access any variables or any functions that we create within it, we have this nifty thing called get game mode, which we can then quite simply cast to. Obviously, if we're casting from, what is my example? That one, game manager. Let me rename this to game manager underscore BP 2. Now, if I want to cast to my game manager, cast to game manager BP2 class, there we go. Okay, obviously I need to bring in another actor, and that can be a bit, at times, a bit more convoluted, and if you're sort of chaining things, it can get messy. Whereas if we actually use the class that Unreal gives us this nifty little box, get game mode, and we can call this in pretty much any blueprint, and we can then pull off it, and we can directly cast with no issues. And as a result, I can then get a reference. Now we'll come on to this bit later on, and then all we can do is take in the trigger box. Now, something to bear in remember is when I was discussing with some friends when I was planning this tutorial, you could make a blueprint, add a trigger volume to the blueprint, and then again use the blueprint to then trigger the logic. The reason I ultimately ended with just using a trigger volume in the level blueprint is the simplicity. If I drag in this trigger box, okay, and I'm in the level blueprint where you are here, third person map. If I right click with that trigger volume selected, I can call functions and I can call events in relation to that trigger volume. So it just simplified the process because I wanted to track this via the level, not by another blueprint, just because of the way I was using the game mode. And that's just from my experience. So all we do, again, am I using my character reference, using me? Am I that person? If so, this is true. If this is true, obviously this is the condition. I've got my third person character score and I compare it to the game mode score, the goal. Are they the same? If so, we can then set our overall score and we can open our new level. So if I show you this in action, so we walk in. Oh, hang on, let me check. Yeah, okay, I've changed my game mode back. Otherwise, that'd be embarrassing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've loaded in. Boom. Now, this doesn't look like it hasn't changed, but I can assure you it definitely is a new game mode, not a new game mode, a new level, because you can see at the top, it's showcasing, it's debugging 2 bits of line of code every 3 seconds, because I wanted to make sure I could tell the difference. Not only that, if we open the level blueprint of the new map, which obviously it take me back to the original map. Where have I saved you? Save selected. If I open this, you can see this is level 2. Now, again, in our second level, which is exactly the same, and I suppose what I can do is we'll just change the wall purple or blue, the same colour. Let's just duplicate you. So background, just so there's a visible difference. I'll close you down. And we'll change you to green. Save. So let's do this thing. Background. There we go. Okay. So if we go back to the first world, and just to showcase this working properly. 3, 4, 5. Boom. Okay. As we can see, it's a far better visualization of it is a different level. Now, again, this different level again has 5 coins. There is a trigger volume here. If I go back into it, and it pretty much is the same. However, there is a change. One of the key differences, if I press play now, you can see I have 0 and game mode second appearing. So let's break this down. So obviously, as it stands, if I press play in our second level, it will say 0 Rob's game mode second. So it's loading a different game mode and it's not carrying any value. Now, if I go back through the first level and collect, the coins, or we walk through and we load in. Okay, we can see this time the debug message is 5. I zoom in. Oh, I got an F8. Let's zoom out. We can see 5 because the score I had in the original level, the first level, was 5, and I'm loading a second game mode. So what we have here in the second game mode, which is here, I have this game instance. I'm going to create a reference. I have a custom event, which is delayed by 3 seconds. This is not the best practice, so this is purely for demonstration purposes. And all this does is it gets my game mode, and outputs it, and then it gets the overall score which I have in game mode, and our game instance, sorry, and output it. Now, our game instance is something very special which we can use with our game mode. Now, if we were in Unity and we wanted to move information between scenes, there's a couple of different ways we could do it. We could set things to don't destroy and load. We could create static variables. Player paths is often my preferred method when I'm working within Unity, or we can serialize to XML and JSON. Now, Unreal again has already figured out this problem for us and has given us a solution which is inbuilt within the framework that the engine is built on, which is the game instance. Right, so the moment you boot the game up, the game instance is created and it's persistent as long as the game is open. You can store variables and various aspects of the game, and again, you can access this class. So, if we come back to this lovely photo of the framework, we launch our game, obviously we load a level, we have our game modes, we have a player, and we have gameplay over here. However, we do have, in the middle of loading our level and launching our game instance. It's persistent manager actor. It carries across level loads destroyed upon the engine shutting down. So, again, we can create one of these. In this case, hang on, there we go. We can create here, I have a game instance, so if I open this up, it looks like a blueprint, obviously minus a few traditional aspects. There's obviously not as many variable options or settings, but we can create variables and we can then access those variables. So in this case, I have something called overall score. So all I do in my second game mode is I see, again, like our get game mode, I've got get game instance, which means I can cast and create references and access the variables and functions within that class. In this case, our instance class. We can, again, define our own as well. So, if we want to remember information loading between level 1 and level 2, we can then put it in our game instance. And this is obviously good practice. Obviously, going to checkpoints, you would always want to put things, anything you want to save between scenes or levels and maps in this case, you would use the game instance. So to create our game instance, all we need to do is right click, blueprint class. Now the game instance isn't going to turn up in the common window, we have to search for it. In this case, I'm going to type game instance and we choose the very first class and we click select, example instance, and there we go. We have our game instance. We've created our second game instance. Now if we go back to project settings, which I have already up here, obviously we have our game mode here. Now right at the bottom here, we have our game instance class, where we can then set the instance class we want to use when we load the game. And it's really important that we set this to the one we want. Now, whilst you might have multiple game modes, you can create multiple game instances. I've always and only ever used the one. I've created my own and used that. Because it's persistent, the moment you load the level, it's there and destroyed when you obviously shut down the game. You wouldn't be swapping out game instances as you play the game. You would have one and one only. Now obviously when you shut down the game, anything within the game instance would also be lost, so this is why you have to ensure you're also saving that data if you want it to be persistent between each boot and be part of the save progress. But that is something completely different. Saving the game is a different process which you would embed within your game instance, or you would put it as part of the process. So when you're saving your game, you're also saving the information in those instances within your variables, and you're updating the instances, which then uses that as the reference to save. So it can get quite convoluted. However, if we look here now I'm in level 1 and I want to go to level 2. Okay, so I'm going to collect the coins again. And we're going to load into level. Now, our second game mode is this one. Yeah, as we know, all it is outputting the strings information. But if I go to actually the second map, and we'll just save that. Okay. Now in my project settings, maps and modes, I still have Rob's game mode first, but it's utilizing a different game mode. It's utilizing game mode 2, which is outputting the text up top. And obviously the reason it's here is I haven't progressed, I've loaded directly into the level. Now, this is obviously a highlight of this game mode used game mode to use if not specified in any other. Okay, so if we don't specify game mode in each level, this is the one it's going to use. Now, in our maps, in our levels, in our world settings, we have this game mode override. And if we obviously look at the text that is there when we highlight over it, the default game mode to use when starting this map in the game, if the value is null, the initial settings for the game type is used. So if this is null, it's going to use this one. However, if I save this now, you can see nothing is outputting because it's using the default game mode. The moment I set this to the second one, it should output in, there we go. And we can change this, and there's different ways we can change this. Now, the two ways I've always changed the game mode when loading a level have been, obviously when I'm in the map, I've overridden it with the game mode I want it to have. However, the other option, and the other way to do it, and it's not my preferred way, but it can be done, is you can actually, on open level, in the options, set it to also change game mode on load. It's not something I would encourage you to do, because I don't think it's as efficient, and I've known to have issues with this. From my experience anyway, it's got to be the correct format, and I've actually generally had more crashes. Great if you're trying to do something quick and debug something, but in all honesty, just overriding this is what this is here for, does the job, it works, wonderful. So obviously you just need to think about where you put in your logic and what is in your game mode and what's in your game instance. But hopefully that's been a quick introduction into how to use the game mode and how to use the game instance, and actually start using the framework which Unreal has and provides, and you work within, rather than trying to shoehorn in a Unity approach or another another engine's approach and fight the engine, because you will have issues as a result. I hope this has been useful, and hopefully it's for the first of many. I know this is probably a little bit more rough around the edges, but as I try and find my feet, hopefully these will get more up, they'll only get better. But thank you for listening, and have a good day.